Hi, I'm Kathleen Murphy, and I'm a legislative policy analyst with Best Friends Animal Society. We're so glad you joined us today, and I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves. Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Swafford. I'm the Senior Manager of Campaign Strategy here at Best Friends.
Hey y'all, I'm a legislative attorney with Best Friends, and my name is Kelsey Gilmore Futerall.
Great. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about legislative policy and process. And so I just wanted to kick it off with kind of what I consider the origins and the beginning, and just ask y'all what you think about how does policy even start? A lot of times policy comes at us and it's already formed. Sometimes it's half-baked. How does that happen? Where does that grain of sand begin?
Wow, that is a great question and much more simple than most people probably think. Generally, it comes from just somebody having an idea and voicing that idea to their state representative, state senator, city council member, county commissioner, or even United States congressman. I think back to my time in the legislature and so many things that we saw become law and so many changes that happened for the good of the people were just somebody's idea of things from, the bittering agent being put in antifreeze that is so important, has saved so many pets in this country, 20 years ago didn't even exist 15 years ago. And the first state in the country to pass that legislation and become model legislation was Tennessee. And that idea came from an 8-year-old little girl up in the Tri-Cities area, or up around Bristol, Haley Ham. The reason it's called the Haley Ham Act was because an 8-year-old little girl who had the tragic loss of her dog accidentally said, is there not something we can do to make animals stop drinking antifreeze? And literally just sitting around tables and thinking about it, from the thought of an 8-year-old little girl in a tragedy, has saved countless animals in this country. So it really is that simple. Somebody just having an idea that would make something better, and then taking it to lawmakers, and lawmakers taking it and noodling on it and talking through it, and the process begins.
That's such a good example, Eric. Sorry, Kathleen, I want to jump in because I think, what's really interesting about that example that Eric brought up is that a lot of times these ideas come from an incident or a scenario that, Haley's dog wasn't the first dog to eat antifreeze and pass away. And when we start to hear the same story come up over and over again, we realize collectively there's a problem that we can solve. And so I think, turning those really challenging situations, or where a community or a person might be struggling, into an opportunity is such a great springboard to passing laws.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe we should elect more small children to elect in office than grown-ups, maybe. But Eric, you used a term that I wanted to kind of ask for some clarification, because not everybody is used to this term, model legislation. I know at Best Friends we talk about model legislation, but I think probably outside that could be kind of a jargony insider term for some of us. What do y'all kind of consider model legislation?
Well, when I say model legislation, we all say there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. When one state passes something that is new, is a new idea, is simply fantastic, like the Haley Ham Act was here in Tennessee, then other states go, oh, well, we need to be doing that. And rather than them trying to craft legislation and come up with the verbiage to do the same thing, they literally just pick it up and move it. And also many organizations do things like drafting and adopting model legislation, and then offer that to legislators to try to get them to carry and pass, such as we do with dangerous dog ordinances. We have model legislation, as we call it, that was worked out with Best Friends legislative attorneys and the International Municipal Lawyers Association to come up with quote model language for dangerous dog ordinances that will keep communities safe and also protect the rights of property owners and pet owners, and helps keep dogs out of shelters. Obviously, it's model legislation that is not breed specific. As we know, that does nothing to keep communities safe and only causes hardships for people, pets, and shelters. But we worked on that with them, or our legislative attorney team worked on that with the IMLA to come up with this model legislation so we can offer it to city councils, county commissions, and even state legislatures.
No, I think that's great to kind of know about that, because elected officials are not experts on every type of policy that comes before them. I mean, they have their job back home, they have their family and what their family business may be, but they're not going to be an expert in every field that comes across and that they'll be voting on. And that's why it's so important for Best Friends to be able to offer that resource to them. So let's go back and use your example of little Haley Ham. So how did Haley know who to go to? How did she know if she needed to go to like her city council member or her county commission? Was that a state thing, a Congress thing? How do we know really what's the difference between each level? Who deals with what?
That is a great question, and I'll take the first shot at it, and then defer to Kelsey. But most times I would encourage people, start with your city council member, because lots of things can be dealt with at the city level and can be dealt with much quicker than the wheels in the state legislature, or much less the wheels of the United States Congress. So I would always start with my city council member. And if it's something that can't be done locally, they'll know to tap their state legislature, and so on and so forth up the chain. But I always tell people, contact your city council member first. And I never miss an opportunity to say the most important relationship with an elected official you will ever have is with your city council member and your county commissioner. Those are the people that impact us the most each and every day, and the people that can have the biggest impact the fastest on the things that are most important to us. So I always say start there and go from there. With Haley's example, the example of Haley, her parents actually had a good relationship with their state senator, and took the idea to their state senator, and they passed it to a state representative to carry it through the House. And I remember so clearly the day that little Haley testified before the House Ag Committee, and the impact that it had, and the stories that were told in that room that day. Another representative had lost his dog Charlie, literally from he and his stepdad working on a car and a radiator. They'd flushed out a radiator. They thought they had dried it all up, and Charlie got a hold of a rag. And I mean, it literally brought tears to the eyes of everybody sitting in that room. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And just to think about all the animals that have been saved because an 8-year-old little girl said, "Can't we do something?" So we did.
Yeah, exactly. So Kelsey, could you give us some examples of maybe what's the difference between the different levels of government and how they handle, I mean, not how each one deals with everything, right? But like, what are some animal issues that like the federal government deals with as opposed to the state, as opposed to the local? Could you give us some more of a global idea of that?
Yeah. So those of you on the call are already involved very heavily in animal sheltering and rescue in your community. So you operate already under a set of laws. You likely have an idea, as Eric and Kathleen and I have been talking about, what laws or policies might be really helpful to you, what might seem to cause burdens or get in the way of you being able to do the work that you need to do. And they come at different levels of government, like Eric said. So a lot of what shelters have to be responsive to and rescues are at the local level. Those things might be tethering laws, humane tethering laws. They might be animal at large laws. They might deal with community cats and what the definition of an owner is for who's responsible for which animals. So typically we start at that local level to look at those ordinances and try to identify what exactly the problem is. It might be that the local authority is kind of hamstrung by what the state law says. So then we have to go and pull the state level codes and see, is there something at the state level that defines what's a dangerous dog? Does it say what animals have to be licensed or are required to have rabies tags on? So then we need to go to the next layer of law and say, well, even if we could pass it, and even if there's an appetite to pass something at the local level, we can't do it without the state's buy-in. And just because it's a state issue doesn't mean it's a lawmaking body, right? We also know that there are licensing boards that deal with veterinary practice, that deal with controlled substances, who can give a microchip, who can administer a vaccination. So we're not always dealing with legislators per se. We might be dealing with a rulemaking body that's separate from your typical state house kind of issue. And then finally, federal, we hear about federal the most, but it actually has the least amount of impact on the day-to-day operations of animal shelters and the state of animal sheltering in the country. So very rarely, with the exception of, maybe commercial breeder laws for puppy mill type situations or public housing access, because those are federal dollars. But very rarely will we be working at the federal level to problem solve. Typically, we're both local and state, both laws and policies.
So that makes a lot more sense. Kind of local is closer to home and has that more regulatory power. But we all know the state likes to jump in and out of things, and then hate to play on that stereotype of DC is far away, right? But so Haley Ham is now the star of our conversation now. Her parents had a relationship with their state senator. But not everybody does that. Not everybody knows or has a personal relationship with their legislators at any of these levels we talked about. And so so if I've come, I've noticed a problem with our shelter or with our animal policies here in my city. What are some of those first steps I should take? Should I try to solve the problem myself? Do I need to do research for legislators? Do I need to provide 5 different options? Do I just jump in and raise money? What would y'all recommend as kind of the first, second, third step to do?
Those are probably all things that at some point you're going to be doing.
Where do I start? Where do I begin?
Where do we start? Right. So again, assuming because of the audience that we're speaking to now that the folks here on the call are our network partners, they are working either as shelters or rescues. So your relationship with elected officials is a little bit different, right? Odds are that what you're doing is impacting health and safety in your community. So the best way to start is with a phone call or an email to your local elected officials, and it can be the entire board. If you're fairly new to your animal shelter industry, I would suggest too that you kind of run this up through the chain at your organization to see what, if anything, has been done before on this issue. So again, like Eric said, you're not reinventing the wheel, but you're understanding where the process left off last time, or maybe what the issues were with going forward. Eric, do you want to talk some about where you might go from there?
Exactly right. I mean, that's where it starts. You start with again, run up the chain if you're new through your shelter leadership, your shelter board, and then reach out to the city council. And I agree. First step, always reach out to the entire council. If you don't have a personal relationship, if you don't know your city council member personally, reach out to all of them. Odds are your city council member is going to reach out to you, but there may be one that says, I've had others voice this to me, or this is something that interests me, and they reach out, and you have immediate buy-in by more than one member. And you're, oftentimes if you can get 2 or 3 city council members to buy in on an issue right off the bat, you're 75% of the way there. But to me, that's always where it starts.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to invite those council members or those elected officials to come tour your shelter. Show them how you're taking care of animals, have them meet some of your staff or your volunteers so that they have an idea of what's going on. And that puts the problem into context for them. So if you're looking to pass a trap, neuter, vaccinate, return program, and you come and you bring them through the shelter, and they can see, you know, how many cats you have, how much you're handling in terms of intake and paperwork. Maybe you need more microchip scanners, and they can see the amount of pets that come in that just wait to be scanned for microchip and reunification. But trying to host them on site so they can see exactly what's going on and you can help explain the problem is a really good way to start.
Absolutely. Make it real to them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. I think we have gone over a lot of information in a short amount of time. And so for our network partners, thank you for joining us. Now you know how a problem can spur an idea, how to turn it into a solution. And so I can't wait to join you with our next meeting to learn how to build those relationships with your elected officials, influence those policymakers, and then you'll be able to advocate for change. We'll see you then.